All right, hey everyone, we're going to get started. We'll let folks kind of float in as well. So we're excited to be here today and talk about one of our favorite topics, which is attracting and retaining talent in the K-12 space. My name is Jen. I'm a principal at Agility Consulting. I'm also joined by Jason, who's a managing director at Charter Impact, and Kennedy, who's the CEO of ACE Charter Schools. A little bit about myself. I started my career as a scientist, and I have my PhD in cell biology, and I was a cancer researcher for about 15 years before I became a mom and just didn't see a space for myself in the sciences anymore. I couldn't do experiments from my couch, and I knew I wanted to be home with my kids when they were small. And so I pivoted all of those data research and analysis skills into compensation and talent practices and started at Agility 8 years ago as a founding member of their team and have worked over the last 8 years to build that from a team of 2 to a team of 15. And about half of our clients every year are charter schools. So we work with charter schools around placing exceptional leaders, closing wage gaps, and building talent systems, all with an equity lens. So making sure that we're bringing that equity, bringing equity best practices to our clients. We've worked with charter schools from single-site charter schools all the way up to large CMOs with thousands of staff to build their talent systems, and have worked with CMOs. We work nationally, so both sides of the country, as well as brick and mortar CMOs and virtual and personalized learning charter schools as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Kennedy and let him tell you a little bit about himself. Next.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Ladio, and I have been managing charter schools for the last 22 years in both Massachusetts and California, in southern and northern part of California. I'm currently the CEO for ACE Charter Schools, which is a network of 3 middle schools and 1 high school. Our student demographic is 98% Latinos and 95% from low-income families. The mission for ACE is to get and educate and serve the struggling and the high-need students that are located in East San Jose area in California and get them into college. And what I mean by struggling is students who, for whatever reason, may be having troubles connecting in their local traditional schools. And then high needs for us refers to the fact that we serve 25% special ed population, which is pretty high considering that that's about twice the rate of our local district. I would consider that ACE's mission is very successful. Year after year, 80% of our graduates get accepted into college, and not just get accepted, but they actually attend. So we actually don't fall victim to the summer melt, which is when you have less student attending than graduating. So we work really hard. We have a really good alumni success program. And so we actually have more students attending starting college than at the beginning of the summer. And then the other 20% actually of our students pursue technical careers or military careers. And I'll stop there and I'll say more later on in the presentation. So I'll hand it over now to Jason.
Thanks, Kennedy. Hi everyone, I'm Jason Sidmer. I'm Managing Director at Charter Impact. We are a financial back office provider, soup to nuts, fractional CFO, thought partnership, with school leaders, budgeting, and then accounting, accounts payable, payroll services, Charter Impact Services, a little over 100 schools nationwide. Our clients range, so our smallest client is around 50 students, all the way up to CMOs with over 10,000 students. So we really run the gamut and try to be that thought partner as though you have your own in-house CFO, for making sure you're tracking things. And so as we sort of tracking things, realizing people are coming from a lot of different places, it's good for us to set the table, make sure that we're all on the same page. So while your state's experience might be different than other states, we're all right now ending that ESSER cliff. So understanding your specific school situation or network situation and how your financials look really is going to tie into this conversation around attracting and retaining talent. So as we sort of have this money falling off, there's definitely schools and states that are having the declining enrollment, as well as schools that are having increasing enrollment with the migratory patterns as people leave states. So by show of hands, who here is in a state with declining enrollment? Great. What state are you from? Missouri. What state? California. New York. And then who here is from a state with gaining enrollment? Great. What state? Nevada? Yeah. Getting California's? Florida? New Hampshire. Yeah, so, knowing exactly what your sort of demographic changes are is really going to drive a lot of this conversation. Are you staffing up, or are you losing staff as they move out of state, or are you staffing up because you're increasing, or what your sort of situation is? But with that also, certain states are in different economic stages, right? I think we might be in a recession depending on your state, or there's definitely a looming recession. So understanding the fiscal outlook of your state and how that's going to impact your state's budget and your state's education budget is key here. We're going to look on the next slide. We use California as an example on a couple slides here, just because we want to take one state and put it into actual application. But here, has your state had outsized, cost of living increases in the past year? Now it's pretty much flat or very small, because that's going to set the table for those salary conversations and negotiations that you're going to have, right? And with those small revenue increases, are your expenses still increasing at 5%, 8%, 10%? Because again, the money's coming from one place, and that means you have less for those students, right? So, this morning, if everyone went to the general session, we were talking about Texas and how they had fought off over 80 anti-charter bills in the last couple of years. So understanding your external threats of that state, is it charter friendly? Are there existential issues that you need to be concerned with? And staffing shortages, again, state by state. I read a study recently that said there were over 55,000 teacher vacancies last year across the country, primarily focused more in the West Coast again, but understanding, is there a lot of supply of qualified teaching staff? Would anyone raise their hand that there's just this really large supply of qualified teaching staff? I see thumbs down, so that's why we're in the room. So as mentioned, so that ESSER money's gone, right? These are the top 8 states for ESSER funding. That money was plugging holes and fixing budgets since the pandemic, and now those holes are gaping. So understanding how we can now reassess the situation we're in to find sure footing in the unsteady times that we're in. I mentioned California. So California, when the pandemic happened, they gave a 0% revenue increase, and then over the next 3 years, they actually increased the revenue by 26%. So over 8% average per year for 3 years. But if we look forward over the next 10 years, we're getting a 10% increase. So we're back to about 2.5% projecting out the next 4 years. So if you're giving 3% increases, your revenue isn't keeping up with your just standard increases, plus your benefits are increasing, plus you've got to pay retirement on all of that. So understanding your outlook is really going to be key. And then couple more slides on it, but just setting here, this is again California. California over the last 4 years saw a decline in enrollment by 5.5%. As the enrollment was declining, 8% increase in staff, and those staff saw an 18% increase in salaries. This is exactly the whirlwind of disaster that if you were giving cost of living increases to your staff in line with those COLAs that we saw on the last screen and we see on this screen, you've really set yourself up, honestly, for failure down the road. So this is a real school of ours that's a client, They have a little over 16,000 students. And you can see in example one, as a part of like our thought partnership and looking at the multi-year projection, when they were assessing how they could give out raises and increases, they wanted to match the cost of living revenue increase for their salary increases. And I showed them, yes, you can do that this year. You can do that next year. But if we do that, once the ESSER money dries up, we're at $1 million deficit. So we're going to have to lay people off, or we're going to have to renegotiate salaries, or we're going to have to do something to fix this hole. Whereas if you give still really good raises, so 8% in 22-23 and 5% in 23-24, you're staying competitive with the market, but not putting yourself in a place of detriment down the road. And you can see, maybe hard to read in the back, but still in the green, 300 and almost 400,000 positive for 24-25, and then over 600,000 positive in 25-26 projecting. So those that are with declining enrollment, just want to real quick that you should plan for it to be permanent. The educators that we work with are some of the best people. They make my job a pleasure, but they're also some of the most optimistic people. Everyone thinks they run the best program. If they build it, they will come. They've been watching a lot of Field of Dreams recently. So this is just to reiterate, you should think like this is going to be permanent. You should plan your staffing conservatively. Look at what you can do now and then what you want to do down the road if it comes in better than you're anticipating. Because it's much easier, even though it's still hard, to hire staff than it is to let someone go. So putting yourself in good footing into the year is really important. One of the ones I want to call out in here, or a couple to call out, is just evaluating your facility usage. So we had a client who was over 500 students pre-pandemic, and now they're around 350 students. And working with them in thought partnership of, do you really need this facility? What size facility do you need if we're planning that this is permanent, and reassessing those things? Can you rent part of this space? Can we lower the lease space that you're on? Has anyone gone through the exercise of downsizing their space or reevaluating? Did you want to share how you sort of reevaluated?
So we're kind of in the midst of it right now. But one of our buildings, we have to restructure the grade levels that we're serving to reduce staff in that building. And then we're also seeking to see if we can rent out some of the space or use some of our office spaces in the building. We're currently evaluating, because we have 4 sites, what's the next step in the next 2 to 3 years to kind of consolidate.
Perfect, yeah. So you reevaluated sort of the grade levels that you're serving. Do you need all the office space that you currently have? Can you sort of restructure the leases or change how much space you're going through? And so great way to think outside of the box, or think in a manner that is for the long term and not just sort of the optimistic term, right? One of the other things to call out here is also the bottom one. Differentiate yourself. If school A and school B are paying similar, what is it about your program that's better? Do you have additional benefits? Are you serving high-need students and you can speak to the mission or the intrinsic value that your staff are going to get that might be different than a different school? Do you run a dual language immersion program? Do you run something that sets you apart from the competitors in the space? Which, it sort of ties into our next slide. So these are a couple statistics. Starting sort of in the middle, but last year, the turnover rate in charter schools was 25%. If you compare that with district schools, of only 15%. Probably a lot of reasons for that difference, maybe unionization and other things of that nature, but you also have this differentiation. Can you tell a story that is going to bolster more retention and loyalty from your staff and make them feel like their job isn't just a job, it's something with purpose that can speak to more than just the compensatory piece. The loss of that 25% in charter schools and in districts costs $7 billion in lost knowledge, recruiting costs, additional staffing, things of that nature. If there wasn't that turnover, it would increase the graduation rate by 25%, according to this study. So not only depending on how your school is funded, that could also be dollars for you, right? If kids aren't showing up as often, if they drop out early, depending on if you're enrollment-based or attendance-based, but again, all of it playing in. So, pointing the wrong way. How do we actually get into it? So now we've set the table. Let's talk about some solutions and thought around it, right? Understanding your market. So you will want to figure out, and you can, Agility does comp studies, Charter Impact, because we have so many clients, we can aggregate like what the average teacher salary is for your geographical area, but looking at what the competitive salary should be, normalizing it so you have an understanding of where that pay range should be, where your salary schedule should be, is really important. This is an example of California again, but understanding the market that you're in and where you want to be in that market. Do you want to be in that low end? Do you want to be in the middle or the high to attract the talent and retain your talent? Understand what the increases are actually costing you. So this is an example of 25 teachers, each making $65,000. So if we gave a 5% raise, that's actually going to cost us an extra $100,000. That doesn't include, your state employment tax, your retirement benefits. So at the start, $100,000. Is there something that we can do different that's also going to raise morale over just giving, a 5% compensatory raise, and understanding what that raise would actually cost you to see if it's affordable in the budget? And then sort of on the pay piece is around budgeting. So has anyone ever heard of rock, pebbles, and sand? We love this analogy. This is how we want to create our budgets with our clients. And that's really the rock piece being the must-haves, the pebbles being the I really want to have, and the sand being like, it's nice to have, right? So if you put these into a jar in any order, they're not going to all fit. But if you put them into the jar in the proper order, there's more room, right? You put those rocks, those must-haves into the jar first, and then you put in those pebbles, those I would really like to have them next, and hopefully all the pebbles fit. But if they don't all fit, this is where you start to make the cuts, right? Our jar is now full. But if all the pebbles fit, now we've got the sand, the want-to-haves, and those are going to fill in all the little cracks that are still left and fill your jar to the brim to get the most out of your budget. And part of that is, doing that ground-up budget with your financial team, back office provider, whoever's sort of servicing your needs, to make sure that your needs are being addressed and your program is what it is meant to be. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jen, who will take us through strategy 2.
All right, so the next strategy we're going to talk about is building your trust with staff, building culture with staff by listening and then acting. So we recommend that schools run a staff satisfaction survey annually across their total value proposition to understand what they're doing really well and where their areas of growth may be, as well as to run that survey, if you can, across different demographic groups so you can understand where different identities may be experiencing your organization differently, and then you can take action to correct for any growth areas. In terms of what that looks like, when you act, you want to first understand the results and then share them out with staff and leadership. And you want to request reactions from your stakeholders. So what is surprising to them? What makes sense? What's unclear? Then you want to create an action plan. We recommend doing this in partnership with staff. So this is a great place to pull your staff into an advisory task force and get them involved in some work sections around your growth areas. Which growth areas to staff feel most important to tackle first? What are some actions or activities they think would help to correct for those growth areas? Get their input, understand what matters to them, so that you can then create an action plan that's tailored to the needs of your staff, and that builds, again, that trust with staff, builds culture, and ultimately can increase retention in your schools. And then once you've done that, you want to make sure that you're measuring progress. That often looks like pulse surveys, so running a small survey every quarter, maybe it's 5 to 20 questions, not too large, to understand if the changes that you're making around your growth areas are being effective in shifting staff perceptions. And changing the way that staff view the school and changing the culture at the school. Again, and one of the great things about this is that really the focus here on that solution and the next ones I'm going to present is that they're low cost, they're low-hanging fruits. Running a survey every year is something that you can oftentimes do internally, or you can partner with an external firm that'll run them, but it usually might cost you $1,000 or $2,000. It's not a big bucket item in terms of budget, but it can have a lot of impact when staff feel heard and staff feel that the school cares about them and is taking action to meet their needs. So the next one I'm going to talk about is prioritizing pay equity. When I talk to staff, when I'm in focus groups, when I'm talking to teachers, one of the things, I hear two things generally around pay. One is my salary isn't high enough, or it's not competitive with other schools in our area. The second one is I don't understand how my salary works. Like, I don't understand why it is where it is or how it got there, and it doesn't feel clear to me. And so our pillars of equity are really focused around that second bucket, around making pay clear and transparent, fair and consistent, and inclusive of inclusion and belonging. So when policies are clear and transparent, staff understand why decisions are being made the way that they are. They're less likely to make assumptions around decision making, and everything is just less fuzzy. That starts to build staff trust again and buy-in into your pay system and into your salary scales. Once you have shared out your salary scales or your salary program with staff, you want to make sure that you implement it fairly and consistently across the org. One of the best ways to build trust is to make sure that you aren't making exceptions. Whether we want them to or not, staff and teachers are talking to each other about what they make. They're talking about their pay, and if they find out that their teacher in the next room over has the same years of experience as they do, but they're making a few thousand more, now you've got an exception that's eroding trust, eroding your culture, and that potentially can lead to attrition. And then the third one, you want to make sure you're prioritizing inclusion and belonging, and that well-intended policies don't disadvantage certain groups of staff within your organization. When staff feel valued and appreciated by their organizations, when they feel cared for and like they belong, they're gonna stay, right? They wanna be at those schools. They wanna be in those organizations where they feel like the organization is invested in them and their lives. So there is a great resource that you all can download. It goes through our pay transparency roadmap. It talks about those 3 pillars and actionable steps that you can take at each of those pillars. Again, low-cost things that you can do within your organization to increase pay equity and increase pay transparency. And I believe, is this also available on, yeah, this will also be available on the session as a resource for the session. So the last, one other way that you can show staff that you care is to show that you care about their career growth, right? So you can, and another way that you can again increase retention is to build your own talent pipeline. So the most successful programs are created with clear vision. They understand what the goal is, right? It's to grow our own teachers. It's to grow our teachers into leaders. Whatever that goal is, it'll look different from school to school. They take in stakeholder input, so they go out and ask staff, what's important to you? If you go out and ask your teachers and 90% of them say, I want to stay a teacher, I'm happy being a teacher, that may not be where you want to invest. You may not want to invest in leadership training for all of your teachers, right? You might want to just invest it in the 10% that are interested in moving into those leadership roles. Similarly, if you go out and you ask your teaching assistants or teacher aides, what are you interested in? They all say we want to be teachers. That could be a really attractive retention lever for your teacher aides and a great way to keep them in your school. So make sure that you're talking to the folks in your school, to your staff, your teachers, to understand what is most important to them. And then you can oftentimes do this with external support. So there are a lot of different programs out there that will partner with schools to provide training opportunities, whether it's teacher pipelines, so training teacher aides, up into getting teachers credentialed, or providing leadership training opportunities for teachers to grow into, say, assistant principal or principal level roles. Career pathway programs increase satisfaction, so they increase staff satisfaction. When staff are happy and satisfied and they feel like they belong, again, they want to stay, right? I keep hitting that one on the head, like nailing that one in there. It increases retention. It also increases recruitment, because happy staff, happy teachers, they go out and tell all of their friends about how awesome your school is, and all of their friends want to then come and work at your school, and they're applying to be there because they know the work environment is awesome and that's a place they want to be. Career pathways give staff opportunities to work towards leadership incrementally and gain skills and financial rewards along the way. So it's important to recognize that it isn't something that typically happens overnight. If staff are training to become a teacher, say you have a teacher's aide who wants to become a teacher, they're likely working full-time in your school during the day. Maybe they take one class a semester, and they can do that over 3 or 4 years, get enough credits to complete their degree, right? And then move into a teacher position and work towards their credentials. So it's something that's going to happen incrementally over time, and it's important to be realistic about that with staff, and realistic as with the school as well. And a key part of that is making sure it's financially sustainable. You don't want to put a program into place and then in 2 years say, oh, we've got to cut that. That is going to break trust, it's going to hurt culture, and it's going to lead to attrition. So you want to make sure if you can put a program into place, you can sustain it for 5 or 10 years, that staff and teachers can become invested in it, work towards the training and development they need to move into that next level for their careers. In terms of building your own talent pipeline and how to do it, you want to start by building what we call a job classification framework. And this is something for schools that it's not as common in the school sector to think about job levels in a school. But that's essentially what you're doing. You're starting to think about how do jobs fit into levels in our org, and how can our staff progress their careers within the organization. Once you've built that job classification framework, you then want to define needed skills for success. So what are the skills that are needed at each job level for a person to be successful? Because that's where you're going to want to grow your staff so that they can be successful when they're promoted and they move to other job levels. You then want to make sure, as well as building that, typically we call it a competency framework, so defining those skills for success, that you're also defining clear and transparent promotion criteria. I don't know how many times I've heard, again, from staff, I'm promotion ready, but I don't know why I'm being promoted. There are 2 key pieces to being for promotions to happen. One is the staff member needs to be promotion ready. The second is the organization needs to be promotion ready, and oftentimes that one is missed. Staff understand where they are, but they don't understand where the org is. And so it's critical to have those criteria spelled out for staff. What does it mean for a staff member to be promotion ready? What skills do they need to have? What scores do they need to get on performance reviews? How long do they have to have been in their current role before they're eligible for a promotion? And then what the org needs to be org ready. The org needs to have budget, right? You've got to have money to make a promotion. They can't just happen because someone wants it. And you've got to have a space or a need for that role, right? You've got to have a need for someone in that role in order to promote someone into that role. You want to make sure that those career opportunities are then transparent to staff. A great way to share career opportunities with staff is in team meetings. So if you know a role is opening up, either a new role or someone is moving out of their current role, you can share it with staff in team meetings or send it over an email. Encourage folks to apply internally. That, again, as a retention lever. Folks see they care about me. They're giving me opportunities to grow my career. This is a place I want to stay. Maybe I'm not ready for that role right now, but I know in 3 years when I am ready for that role, they're going to be there for me and they're going to be interested in keeping me. And then the last one is making sure that you train managers. Your managers are your front line. They're the people your staff are going to ask questions. They're the people that are telling staff how it works. And so your managers need to understand how career progression works, how pay works at your organization so that they can explain it to their staff. They also need to be able to coach their staff to grow the skills that are necessary for career progression. I think in the school space, I think schools do a wonderful job of training or doing coaching, having instructional coaches for their teachers, right? Training managers to coach teachers to grow the skills that they need to be successful in the classroom. And so just incorporating that here as well, making sure your managers are trained not only to answer staff questions, but also to grow staff. And so just going to show you an example of a job classification framework. I like to show this because, again, in the school space, we don't always think about job levels in our schools or career progressions, but it's quite simple. This is a simple example here where you have assistant with the with their degree, and then working towards credentialing can move into a teacher or counselor roles. Teachers can move into an assistant principal. Assistant principals can move into principals, and principals can potentially move to be an executive director, right? So this now allows you to think about what could career progression look like within our school, and how can we share this out with staff so that they can start to understand what their career progression might look like if that's interesting to them or something they want to seek. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kennedy and let him talk about real-world solutions.
Thank you. Okay, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to come down to the floor level so I can get closer to you. Okay, so before the conference, we sent out a short survey, and we asked the question, what are the things that attribute to turnover? And so there were basically 4 buckets. More than 50% mentioned competitive pay being the main reason. The second 27% was due to inflexible schedules, and then third was unionization, and then the fourth was other. So I just want to see a show of hands here. If you raise your hand if you have more than 5% turnover in your organization. More than 5%. Okay. All right, so everyone. Anyone has more than 10%? 15%? 20%? Sold to 15% now. So this is clearly an issue, right, for all of us. Now, I'm going to talk to you in terms of, for me, as CEO for ACE Charter School, this is definitely, competitive pay is the #1 reason why we lose our staff. So for years, year after year, we keep losing key staff, key administrators, and when I came to the organization, I guess 2 years ago, I started to ask the question, like, why have we been losing folks? And then I found out, some of our ACE has been around for 16 years, so some of the co-founders of our middle schools or high schools have moved on, which I wish we had retained them, right? But they move on, and guess what happens? When they move on to the district or other charter schools, they take their network with them. And so over the years, they become great recruiters for their organization, and you start to see your key staff kind of wither away. So rule number one is really key to keep your folks, because when they leave you, they become recruiters of your people. So what we did, when, right as I came in, Agility had come in, and they had done they did a compensation study. And the results of that compensation study for us is that we decided to increase our salaries so that we would be on the 75% percentile, which means that we were paying the same more than 75% of the local schools or district or charter schools in the surrounding area. Now, guess what? We were in the 75%, so you figure like we fixed it, right? Nope, we didn't fix it. We keep losing people. So what are we doing? I'm bringing Agility back so that we can do another. So it did slow down, but it didn't stop, right? So we're bringing them to do a second study 2 years later, because the market keeps moving and our salaries did not rise. So the goal now is going to be making sure that our salaries are in the top 85 to 95%. Right? And I think at that point, that's going to do two things. Hopefully, it's going to stop the loss of staff, right? It's going to slow it down. You're never going to stop, but it's going to slow it down. But then I think instead of, the main thing for me, that instead of being in the defensive mode all the time, losing my folks to the competitors, my good people, is it puts you in the offensive. So now, guess what? This becomes a magnet because if the number one reason is competitive pay, people like your mission. I hear it all the time. Like, we really like ACE. We really love, I love my time here, but I just can't pass up that great opportunity. So hopefully now we're going to be in the offensive. Now, how does this happen? We don't just have a ton of money to accommodate this increase, and it's easy to say, increase your salary to 85, 95%. Very easy to say, extremely hard to do. The way we've done it is that we have been downsizing for the last 2 years. Now, I haven't been downsizing because I wanted to increase my salaries. The reason we have been downsizing is because California, just like early in the show of hands, is one of the states that's losing a lot of students. We have lost 500,000 students over the past 8 years. We were at 6.3 million. We're now in the state of California at 5.8 million. Right, a lot of that is due to high cost of living. So all the high cost areas are losing anywhere from 10 to 15% enrollment. But a lot of it is also, and they're moving out of the state. But a lot of it is also due to the slow birth rate, the declining birth rate. Right, so that's really one of the main drivers. So that's a 1-2 punch for the state of California. So because of that, we have been. We, meaning in the South Bay, the districts, the traditional schools, the charter schools, even the private schools, they've been losing enrollment for the last 8 years. Charter schools and regular schools have been shutting down, which makes it really hard at renewal, because a lot of times your authorizing board is trying to decide, which ones do we want to see survive long term? Our district schools or charter schools. So it gets murky, the politics. But the other reason that we have is the financial cliff, right? The one-time sunsetting of one-time funds. So at the end of this year, a lot of the ESSER funds are going to sunset. And so for us, for ACE, that translated to $4.5 million. So luckily, we got ahead of this train 2 years ago. And so over the last 2 years, we've downsized about 45% of the organization, right? So we're 60% of what we were. And what I did coming in, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to target the CMO, right? Because that's the one that grew with a pandemic fund. So that's the one that has to go down the most. So you protect your schools, but you really downsize your central staff, which is where a lot of that growth came from, that one-time money. In terms of the other key thing that you're going to face is how do you do that? Right? Folks are going to look at you, and the first thing I said is, we need to downsize your department. The first thing I hear is, that's impossible. I can't live without my team. I'd rather leave if you're going to make me do that. So I said, okay, I hear you. So I just allowed folks that when they left, we would just not backfill. So the natural attrition is one effective way. I would say 80% of my downsizing was due to natural attrition. That's why you want to start early. You don't want to backfill those positions because it's really hard. And then at the end this year, I did say, okay, now we're going to not renew some particular roles. And again, I got that response of, that's impossible. How am I going to actually do that? I can't live without my team. So that's when we focused on the Pareto principle, the 80-20, right? 20% of your activities are going to yield 80% of the results. And so we went through every job description, we looked at the roles and the responsibilities, and we took that 20% that was high yielding, and we just left out the rest. And so that's how we have effectively been able to downsize. Everyone is carrying a lot more water, but in a more, without burnout, in a very efficient and effective way. Okay, so the other reason was inflexible schedules. Look at these three. One of them is, these are the solutions, right? Work from home, flex days, and volunteers, parents, community members, what have you. And turn to your elbow partner. If you don't have an elbow partner, just turn backwards. And just kind of, for 30 seconds, talk about which one of these is the more effective solution for you, or has been. Okay. Less than that. No, thank you. Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you. Okay. So among these three choices, who voted for flex days? Okay, who would like to volunteer and explain? Yes. You can't trust your home. You can't trust the work at home.
Just let hopefully we found that working remote wasn't effective for us. Rather than flexible schedule, then we look at that we choose to be at home rather than at home.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Anyone else? No. Okay. Now, for who chose work from home? Yes. Yep, absolutely. Well, you're a strong advocate. I like that. Who volunteers? Who chose that category? Yes.
So volunteers, not volunteers per se, but we would call them interns, doing their internship.
Okay.
Completing their coursework, their internship,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time helping the school get things done in whatever role or task.
Absolutely. I love volunteer. I love interns at 100%. I mean, you get them at a fraction of a cost. You get really smart people, and they're working on their credentials. And at the end of the year, you get a really smart, dedicated employee. All right. So let's move quickly then to here is unionization. How many folks here have unions in your schools? Raise your hand. Keep them raised. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not many. How many are afraid they're going to get unionized? No one's a one? No one else? I'm always afraid. Okay. Let me tell you, you should be afraid because in today's age, especially after the post-pandemic, the burnout, the shortage of teacher, unless your work environment resembles that of Disneyland and everything's great, you should always be concerned because there is that potential. And the other reason is declining enrollment. So what happens in declining enrollment? That's across the board, right? So in those states that are experiencing that, there's downward pressure on the unions to increase their membership. And guess what happens when you're looking for new markets? You're looking for mid to large size charters. All of a sudden, that becomes a really good prospect. So for me, the last 3 years, I've seen 3 charter networks in the South Bay, right in my backyard, get unionized. And so I started to ask the question, what's driving that? And again, a lot of it is teachers may not be very happy. They may not be very clear. They may feel a little bit insecure. They may not feel after the pandemic that the structures are there to support them, especially with mental well-being and their students. And so it is a real possibility. So for me, these are the 5 things that you can do to help keep unions at bay. I lean heavily into 3 of them. The first one is teacher voice. That's my number one. I find that every day, again, everybody knows that teachers are underpaid and overworked. Who would disagree with that, right? No one. Okay. So what does that mean if they're overworked? Every day they have a lot of challenges. Those challenges come in terms of classroom discipline, classroom management, parent relationships, administrative, conflicts with the central office. Everybody likes to blame the CMO, right? So that's why you need to listen to them, figure out what are their concerns. But then, more important than that, you need to ask them what are the solutions, their voice, their input. And I find that I always end up supporting their recommendation, even when the principal or the central office don't agree. They may, I may say, well, I don't know if that's a good idea, but guess what? I rather support them because they're going to feel much better about it. At the end of the year, if they're successful, it's a win-win. If they're not successful, that's when I go back and say, okay, maybe we want to try it my way next year. But you have to support them, right? And so it's not the best solution. It's a solution that your teachers want to implement. Teacher voice is critical. That is the solution to my everything. The second for me is career option. I take a lot of pride in making sure that we identify young, talented staff and that we invest and grow them. And there's no better satisfaction I've been doing this for 22 years. My reward, my thank you is always all those people that I've promoted to principals, have become EDs, have gone to other, growth in their career path. That, for me, being part of their evolution is amazing because we're here not just for the students, but we're here for the adults as well, right? We're educating children, but we're also growing adults. And then the number 3 for me is recognition. That one is the easiest one to do. So recognition around network days. So when your schools come together for, we call it network days, professional development, we do value awards. We allow the principals to choose the teachers and the awards they're going to give and the why. Nothing means more to an individual. Think about when somebody says thank you to you, but then they just say, oh, great job. But they actually say why they think that was a good, why they appreciate you. That goes so much, so deep and so long. So that's where you as an administrator, as a leader, you can demonstrate your empathy and really appreciate that person and put yourself in their shoes. All right, well, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason.
Thanks, Kennedy. So we're going to open the floor for questions if anyone has any. But before we do, every conference, especially this one, always wants feedback. How did we do? And in order to do your session evaluation, you'll want to go into the app. You need to add attracting and retaining talent as a session, and then you can give the review in the app. I believe it's only a couple of questions. If you can take a couple minutes as we're going here, and do the survey. Feedback welcome. Let us know how we did. Let the conference know that you loved us, and that would be great. Okay, perfect. With that, I open it up. Does anyone have any questions? Sure. Sure. So I'm going to repeat it back. So just to make sure everyone heard, the question was, is anyone in the room or on the stage doing anything with teacher housing? Does anyone brave enough? Yeah, I'll bring you the mic if I'll hop down.
Hi, so I am with Drew Charter School in East Atlanta. As part of our enrollment policy, we prioritize students in a neighboring community. We target that for a number of reasons, including economic, deficiencies. And as part of the relationship we have with the apartment and townhome community next door, any employee of ours get a 25% discount on their rent there, which is very expensive in Atlanta, particularly a gentrifying area, in the city of Atlanta. So, so we already had that one partnership in regards to enrollment, but it grew with staff.
One more example.
Hi, we're from the state of Nevada, where we have a very dramatic teacher shortage. So we advertise on national platforms and we offer a moving stipend. And we've built that in to avoid a funding cliff because we don't see the pipeline very fat.
Thank you. I think we had another question back here. So he gave an example that a board member purchased a building and rents it specifically to staff. And that's a great benefit for that school that they have such a board member that can give back that way.
I don't think I need this, do I? Could everybody hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, he was just giving, his schools are in Los Angeles, and LAUSD has been very uncharter friendly, even more than the state as a whole recently. So, other questions? Question?
No, I was just going to say in response to that question as well, you can always seek out local realtors, like my pastor's a realtor, and so he works specifically with teachers that offer discounts and things like that. So there's other companies that you can seek out to help with that space, especially when you're retaining teachers, or trying to attract new teachers, and letting them know you have those community partnerships.
It's a great example. Yeah, finding that community partner that might specialize or give a discount for teaching staff. Question?
Yes, I want to drill into that other 12% of why teachers are not retained. And I think that it may be because of the organizational culture. So I really want to do some work for our next board retreat, because we do have a problem with that. I think, I'm a new board member, but I think it may be that organizational culture. And I want to be able to find research on that. Where can you direct me? Because I do believe that there will be a certain percentage of salary that people will take less, maybe 5%, maybe it's even 10%, if in fact that culture is affirming, building, value giving. So that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm going to give you a hard time with one of my questions. So I actually have a comment. Based on one of the slides talking about the surveying of staff, I think that is 100% critical. One of the things that we've learned to do over time is survey twice. Survey mid-year, survey at the end of the year. And the mid-year survey is so critical because in one way it's more important than the end of the year. If you can show actionable steps to act on the results of that survey, and hopefully the staff feels that it is anonymous. So hint, hint, use an outside agency to handle that. If you could show actionable steps from whatever the survey results are, and then share what those actionable steps are, as well as share what the survey results are, then they start to value more what you're putting in the survey and what they're putting into it as well. And I think also asking staff to be constructive. So instead of saying, this sucks, or I don't, whatever negative statement they want to use, it's okay to be negative. Attach something critical and constructive to it simultaneously so that the school or the organization can be actionable, and then train your staff how to do that. And then my question to you, but I already know the answer to it, because these guys are my back office. So just for everybody else, what do you guys do either different or better, in your opinion, as a back office support when it comes to like the strategy planning, when you're talking about, you know, staff retention or integrating some new ways to retain staff? Maybe you're bringing on a program, you're bringing on some like retirement contribution additive. How do you guys help support organizations to plan for that? And is there anything that you do different or better than other back offices in that regard?
Thanks, Jason. Not a plant in the audience. I think we really work hard to try to be thought partners with our schools. There's a lot of competitors in the space that are accounting firms, and you lose that CFO sort of leveled knowledge. And we always make sure to have weekly meetings with our clients, or we try to have weekly meetings when they're available, because everyone's happy to have a weekly on their calendar and get that time back if you have nothing to discuss. But it's harder to find that time together if you don't have it sort of reoccurring. So having that, let's review the budget together once a week. Let's go through your staffing list once a week. Let's look at the impact if you do this versus this. Here's your enrollment today. Where is it going to be, you know, at the end of the year? And so going through sort of the modeling on a consistent basis so you can pivot and adjust based on the reality of the situation. I think that that's sort of a differentiator. Yeah.
I just want to add that if organizations are looking for a back office, I didn't get paid to say this, but we were their first client, and we've been with them for the last 14 years. So the great organization. I did not get paid for the endorsement. I wish I would have, but I didn't.
Thanks, Raul. Any other questions? Let me time check. We got 1 minute. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the session. We'll be here if you had any questions.